Such a wonderfully assorted collection of wise, profound, and intelligent sentient entities. So I'm a bookish monk. I like books. I'm very attached to books. So today I'm going to do a book report. The Platform Sutra. I've just reread it recently, and I'm using the Red Pine edition. He's been here before. In fact, I can even give you the approximate date of, well, actually not the approximate date, 4/9/2007. That's when he was here, because he signed my Platform Sutra that he translated, and he even had his phone number. So I actually called him several times. I tried calling him prior to this Dharma talk, but he didn't answer his phone, so he's probably off in China again, because he does a lot of that. He spends almost as much time in China as anywhere else. So this particular translation, well, let me just start with the actual full translation of the Platform Sutra is the Mahaprajna Paramita Sutra of the direct teachings of the Southern School of the Supreme Mahayana, Platform Sutra. That's a mouthful. And so saying a few things about that. So Maha, of course, means great. Prajna, we usually translate that as wisdom. Although I remember years ago attending a Dharma talk by, who was it? Daido Roshi, in which he says, Prajna is not wisdom. That's a translation. Now, so what we mean by the word wisdom in English is not exactly the same as what we mean by prajna, right? I think you probably would agree with that, my learned friends. And paramita has to do with the other shore. And this is an interesting one too, because the traditional metaphor is that we have this great river that you have to cross over, and on one side is samsara and on the other side is nirvana. And so you're over on the samsara side and you're looking across the river to the nirvana side. And so there it is. So we're going to go on a journey. We're going to get over there. And if you're Hinayana, we're going to give you a little canoe with a paddle, and you're going to paddle over there all by yourself, because, it's all up to you. But if you're Mahayana, you can use the ferry. Everybody aboard. And then we have our little beads. We can chant and things like that and do various things en route over there. And then when you get to the other side is not the other side at all, because on the other side, there is no this and that. There is no duality. So the other shore is only the other shore from the point of view of samsara. If you get over to nirvana, nope, there's no difference. The river disappears. Everything is not emptiness. And there you have it. So there's the journey we go on. So the text itself begins by saying that it was essentially a Dharma talk by the sixth ancestor, Hunneng, if I'm saying that right. I'm never sure about the pronunciations of any of these things, because I'm just a Midwest academic reading strange words from a foreign language. So in the text itself, it says that it was a disciple named Fai Shi who made a record of this Dharma talk. Now that's according to the text itself. But then our good friend John McRae, I'm sure everyone here knows this person, or do you? He was a friend, right? And he was a professor here. He wasn't was he when you were studying there? Okay, so he was already gone. All right. These mats that you're sitting on, now tell me if this is true. This is what I heard. He donated these, right?
Yes.
He donated. So things in this temple were donated by this individual. And then after Okamura got nice and settled in here, he flew the coop. He went to Florida for a while before going to Japan. I think he's still in Japan, isn't he? He's still in Japan. So
No, he died.
I'm sorry, he died. What a loss. I mean, this is a great book if you're an academic nerd. You'll like it, right? We nerds, we know each other. Because in true modern academic form, he's going to deconstruct this text and say it's all made up stuff in so many words. Now he says at the beginning of the book that, well, that's okay because, the story still conveys a teaching, but certain alleged historical facts within the text, well, they're not actually historical facts. And that's probably true because, the thing was written down sometime after the sixth ancestor passed on. We don't actually know these facts, then that's part of the problem. So the oldest edition of the Platform Sutra we have, according to this book, is 780. That's the estimation, but that doesn't mean that's necessarily that's the first edition, because we have a certain medieval custom. I mean, this is the days before printing presses, right? So how do you get additional edition of books? Well, that was the bread and butter, the industry of monks. That's what they did. They sat around and they copied texts. Actually, that's what the Shaolin Monastery originally was before it turned into a Kung Fu place. Monks sitting around translating texts. And this is East and West, right? I mean, the Bibles that we have prior to the printing press, they were copied by monks. And of course, the problem with that is monks get sleepy at some point and they start misspelling words or forgetting to put in parts and so forth. So that each edition you get is not quite as up to what the original was. But so all this data is the oldest manuscript we have is 780. Put this a little bit more into context. Hunong himself lived from 638 to 713. So who wrote the text? It says Fagsi here, and but we have it because of this other monk who is the disciple of the sixth ancestor named Xin Hu, who lived from 684 to 758. So he was probably a student, if indeed he was a student of the six ancestors, pretty close to the end of his life, because he's much younger. Now, Red Pine is of the opinion that we can trust this more than what John thinks. That is, there's enough of an overlap, so even though the copies that we have, the Platform Sutra, don't go all the way back to his time period, probably the originals do, and they probably weren't that divergent. I'm kind of leaning a little bit in favor of Red Pine here, I guess because I've talked to him a lot, and I haven't talked to John. But Red Pine, he tends to be less of a academic. He's a little bit of an academic. So when he was here, I actually brought him into my classes because I was teaching a course on Buddhist philosophy. So I brought him into my classes, and he also did a public facing. And didn't he give a talk here too? Or did he just drop in and say hi?
He didn't talk.
He didn't talk. He just dropped in and said hi. Yeah. Okay. I didn't recall him giving a talk, but I do know he was here. So when I go through this, there's the somewhere in here where it talks about so we have two different versions of at least two different versions of the Platform Sutra, and this one is considered the earlier one, and it's shorter. And I didn't take off my shelf the other edition, but I did notice that at least two things that I remember reading in another source that's not in this one, and that the first thing I notice is the flagpole discussion. You know, the two monks were arguing about is it the wind that moves the flag or the flag that moves the wind? Does everyone know that? Anybody? No. And then the six answers said neither. It's your mind that's moving. Okay, that's not in this one. Another thing that I noticed, which isn't in the shorter one, is so when the sixth ancestor became enlightened after he heard the Platform Sutra being read, it just says that he took off and left his poor widowed mother that he was supporting, and there was no account of, well, you just left your mother? He didn't. But in the longer version, it gives some of the explanations. Well, actually, the businessman that he was selling firewood to support himself and his mother said, don't worry about it, I'll take care of your mother. But it doesn't say that in here. So maybe somebody decided that it seemed a little bit too ethically compromised that he would just abandon his mother, so we better add some notation to that effect. So in the first part of the text, it just gives the background story of how he was this poor person. His father died at a young age. He was supporting his mother by firewood. Oh, and he's illiterate. And now this is an important point I want to get back to in more detail in a moment. He's illiterate. He can't read or write. Now in those days, that would have been pretty rare. Because most of the monks came from upper class families with wealth. They were formally educated, most of them. Confucian scholars, Taoists, and the like. In fact, Buddhism was considered by Chinese scholars of that day as a kind of Taoism. They kind of put it in the same bucket with Taoism, a foreign form of Taoism. So it was academics and people who were like copying sutras. I mean, so that was your typical middle-of-the-run monk. And so he didn't fit that genre. He's very different because he is not educated. He cannot read. So everything he knows about the sutras according to people reading it to him. And we find at certain points in the story how, like later in the text, somebody comes along and asks him a story about ask him a question about the Lotus Sutra, and he said, well, I'm sorry, nobody's ever read that to me before, so I can't help you. So well, no problem, I'll read it to you. And as soon as he read it, then immediately the sixth ancestor was able to grasp the meaning of it and give Dharma talks about it. So that's something you have to consider about this individual, is that he's not reading this himself. He's having it read to him. And the first one was kind of semi-accidental. So as the story goes, he's a poor person selling firewood. He has a rich businessman who's buying the firewood for him. And so he's delivering the firewood. And then he hears somebody in the shop reciting the Diamond Sutra. So here's the copy of the Diamond Sutra that I've been carrying around since I was a teenager. In fact, I had to put some tape on it to keep it from falling apart. That's how old this thing is. It's almost as old as I am. So it is part of a larger genre of literature, the Prajnaparamita Sutra, which is really a collection of sutras. It's not one. And the Heart Sutra, which is also in this text, is sort of like the abstract. It sort of gives a quick summary overview. It's like the cliff notes of Prajnaparamita. So we chant that a lot, so that we're kind of like doing the footnotes. The Diamond Sutra is still not that long, but it's certainly longer than the Heart Sutra, but just about everything is longer than the Heart Sutra. And I'm trying to find a good sample here to try to get to the essence of what's in this text. Okay, no. Well, I'm not finding the actual passage that I want. A way in which I summarize this text, and I found it somewhere, but I can't find the exact passage in the text itself. So what was it in this text that the sixth ancestor heard read that invoked his awakening, right? And so all those I must lead into nirvana, into the rim of nirvana, which leaves nothing behind. So we have, first of all, we have the bodhisattva vow here, like leave no sentient being behind. So like, you remember the Bush administration thing about leave no child behind? So here we have, well, that's not good enough. We don't want to leave anyone behind. So we have the bodhisattva vow in here. When those words of the sutra are being taught, we'll find one single thought of sincere faith. That's almost like Pure Land there, just one thought of faith. But the main thing here is neither a dharma, no dharma, no self, so the dharma is no dharma. A summary I read somewhere, and I can't remember where the source is now, but because I can't find the exact wording here, is the world is not the world, therefore it is the world. That some scholar somewhere made that summary of this text. The world is, and it reminds me of that koan of before you study Zen, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. As you study Zen, mountains are no longer mountains and rivers are no longer rivers. At the moment of awakening, mountains are truly mountains and rivers are truly rivers. Nagarjuna, if I were to summarize him, it would be to say that all worldviews are false if you take them as literally true or ontologically true. So I have a certain understanding of what I think the world is about. Well, whatever it is I think the world is all about is not that. That's just so much clutter in my mind. Elsewhere in the text in the Platform Sutra, it says, don't contemplate the mind. You know, Zazen is not contemplating the mind. We all know that here. Zazen is not contemplating the mind because the mind is delusional. And if you contemplate the mind, you're contemplating delusion. And delusion is the same thing as illusion, according to the sixth ancestor. So contemplating the mind is not what we do in Zazen. So when you're doing Zazen, mountains are no longer mountains. That is, you suspend, you bracket out. You were reading Wittgenstein upstairs. Oh, actually, that's not Wittgenstein. I'm thinking somebody else. Husserl about the bracketing. Yeah, you got it. Yeah, so Husserl. So I'm getting Wittgenstein and Husserl. What sacrilege, right? So in phenomenology in Husserl, there's what we call bracketing, and bracketing is, okay, well, I'm going to study the phenomena, but in studying the phenomena, I have to suspend whatever beliefs I have about the nature of the phenomena, because the mind has a tendency of projecting. And so I project what I think the phenomena is about, and that affects how I see the phenomena. Now, Immanuel Kant made the whole point that there's a prioris to any phenomenology. So there's no way that I see the phenomena that I see without the mind providing some form to what it is that I think I see. And so the only way you can kind of escape that is like what we do here, opening the hand of thought. Right? In a sense, opening the hand of thought is synonymous with don't hold any view. How do you not do that? How do you suspend a view? Alan Watts is very artful in the way he talks about this, like the menu is not the meal. So our worldviews are like the menu, and we spend all our time reading the menu and never getting around to the meal, right? That's an expansion on whoever it was who originally said the map is not the territory. You remember who said that originally? I don't remember who said that. It's on the tip of my tongue. But the idea then, there's various ways in which our symbol system within our mind affects the way in which we understand or view the world. And that's sort of the delusion of taking yourself too serious, taking your ideas too serious. My colleagues in the philosophy department, when they ask me about Zen, I say, well, it's sort of like a 12-step program for people who are addicted to ideas. First, you have to admit that you're powerless. I'm just addicted to ideas. All right, so the Diamond Sutra. One other important point here is so we go from Bodhidharma to the sixth ancestor. Now, Bodhidharma put greater emphasis on a different sutra, the Lankavatara Sutra. That was the one that, in fact, the Bodhidharma school was named after that sutra. So somewhere along the line, probably within the fourth or fifth ancestor, there was a shift more toward the Prajnaparamita. And so this kind of finalizes that transition. We put greater emphasis on Prajnaparamita, and we don't so much study Bodhidharma as much. It's sort of like it's been in fact, in the story itself, it talks about that. It talks about the fact that we're shifting away from how it had been to a greater emphasis on the Prajnaparamita Sutra. But there are other sutras that he brings up also in this text. Oh, here I have underlined, Diamond Sutra says, all images are illusions. So that goes to the point, the world is not the world, therefore it is the world. All right, so I don't want to spend too much time on the whole story here about the verses. The body is a Bodhi tree, the mind is like I need to say a little bit about that. So let me get to the storyline here. The sixth ancestor shows up at the domain, at the monastery of the fifth ancestor. Now, the fifth ancestor and his predecessor were really the first two that were getting significant number of students. Because prior to that, it was just a handful, very small community. But the fifth ancestor had several hundred monks. And the way in which they're depicted here, they seem a little bit petty, for reasons I'll get into in a minute. But so here we have all these elite, well-educated monks. And so this illiterate southerner shows up at the monastery, and the fifth ancestor said, well, who are you and what are you doing here? And so, well, I want to be a Buddha. Now, in most translations, it has, well, what does a southerner know about Buddhism? Almost condescending, right? But now, Red Pine goes in a more literal translation of the text, in which he's actually saying, what does a jungle rat know about Buddhism? He breaks down the characters and shows how that actually is. That was like we would say, what does a Southern hick? So in ancient China, the Northerners thought the Southerners were a bunch of hicks, and so they referred to them as jungle rats. So what does a jungle rat know about Buddhism, especially an illiterate jungle rat at that? And so so here's the reply: people come from the north or south. Not their Buddha nature, but I'm sorry, people come from the north or the south, not their Buddha nature. That is, the Buddha nature is neither northern nor southern. The life of a jungle rat and the life of the master is the same. There's no difference, no duality. So be one with your jungle ratness, because that too has Buddha nature in it. So this theme that Buddha nature has a universality to it, that all Buddha nature is the same Buddha nature, irrespective of who it is that is embodying that. Now, the story goes on to say that some of the other monks were gathering around. And so he didn't want to engage in a conversation with him at this time, because he would be afraid that these monks might get jealous if somebody were to, they seem, that's why I mean, they seem petty here, because throughout the story, the fifth ancestor is concerned about the behavior of his monks. They might be hostile to this guy because he's a Southern hick, I guess, or something like that. So the prejudice there is such that he's concerned that he doesn't want to be have too much of a Dharma discussion with him while there are other monks around. So he sends him to the kitchen. Now keep in mind, he's not a monk himself. He's not ordained. He hadn't even taken precepts, nothing. He's just kitchen help at this point. Just labor. Here, go in there and pound rice. And I've seen pictures of where they allege the thing is that he was pounding rice for many years. John is clear that at least the guy was historical, and I just want to show you something real quick. You probably won't be able to see it well because it's going to be on my phone, but this is just, oops. They preserved his body. There is a temple in southern China where the body of the mummified body of the, oops, that's not right. Oh, there it is. The mummified body of the sixth ancestor, and there it is. They enshrined it in a temple, and people go there and pray to it and put incense in front of it and so forth. It seems a little bizarre to me. But, I guess there is a very religious component to Buddhism, especially in Asia, which is not all that different than some of the practices we have in Christianity. We have all these things that are related to saints and so forth, and we have relics, that people pray to and so forth. That even a little piece of wood that allegedly belonged to the cross of Jesus and so forth. But Buddhism isn't beyond that either, because after all, when Siddhartha died and he was cremated, his ashes were distributed to various places throughout India where they put up stupas. So here's where Buddhism becomes a little bit more like our conventional notions of religion, where you have some really interesting beliefs about this, and so they preserve this body so they can pray to it. Anyway, the story about the head monk now, who's presumed that he was going to be the next abbot, because the fifth ancestor said, look, I need a Dharma successor because because it's time for me to retire. We're kind of playing that out here, and so here we have the body of our of our illustrious master, and he wants to retire, but you didn't have a poetry contest. Why didn't you have a poetry contest? Wouldn't that have been fun? I think it would have been fun to have a poetry contest. See what we could come up with. So we have this poetry contest, and so here the head monk writes this thing here. The body is a Bodhi tree, the mind like a standing mirror. Always try to keep it clean. Don't let the gathering dust. And there's different translation. That's actually that I kind of tripped over that one because I'm not used to that particular translation. I'm abbreviating the story some because I think most of you already know it. If you don't, you can look it up. He wrote this on the wall in a monastery in a corridor. And here we have the reference to the Lankavatara Sutra, because apparently they had a monk artist there, or maybe just an artist, who was going to do a landscape painting of scenes from the Lankavatara Sutra on the monastery wall. But on that same wall, the head monk wrote that poem, and so he basically just sent the guy home, saying, "Okay, I guess we don't really need these images after all, but we're going to pay you because we commissioned you, so you can go home now. Here's your payment." After all images are illusion anyway, so so we don't really need that. Instead, we got this wonderful poetry now. And then he had everybody, burn incense to it and chant it and all that. This is good teachings. But then he brought the head monk on the side and said, "Yeah, well, you got a Hinayana understanding here. That's good enough. It's like you walk up to the door, but you haven't passed through it. Your understanding is not good enough. So go back and think about it some more." In the meantime, there's the sixth ancestor pounding rice away. And so all this time, he's not doing zazen, he's pounding rice, because he's not a monk. He's not in the monk's hall. So he doesn't even know any of this is going on, because he's just kitchen help. But he hears somebody chanting that. So, well, what is that you're chanting? Show it to me. Oh, that's nice. Now, I have a poem. Actually, there's two. I have a couple of poems. Will you write them on the wall for me, right beside that one? And so we got two of them here. One saying, the Bodhi does not have, Bodhi doesn't have any trees. This mirror does not have a stand. Our Buddha nature is forever pure. Where do you get this dust? And then a follow-up to that. The mind is the Bodhi tree. And keep in mind that Zen at this point is part and parcel of the mind-only school of Buddhism. It is everything is mind. But if mind is also delusion, then everything is delusion. The mind is the Bodhi tree. The body is the mirror stand. The mirror itself is so clean, dust has no place to land. So that sort of emphasizes a difference here. That's almost like a summary of the Heart Sutra or the Diamond Sutra with respect to the nature of sanyata, or emptiness. All is empty. Now, all is empty does not mean that everything is nothing, although we might put it that way. In English, it's kind of problematic. So my teacher from grad school was Professor Abi, and he did a lesson about the nature of emptiness, in which he said that we really shouldn't be translating it as emptiness. We should be translating it as emptying, because what it really means is that everything is in process and devoid of any substance. So you have a continuous fluctuation. Now, in the Abhidharma, they have a lot of discussion about, well, what constitutes a duration of time, and that's all metaphysically interesting and so forth. But the general point about emptiness, you can, as Nagarjuna himself points out, if you try to take it as a noun, if you take it as a fixed thing, I mean, to say that emptiness itself is the substance can be a problem also, because then you have a fixation on an idea that you believe is the nature of reality. And part of the whole idea of emptying is that you're opening the hand of thought. You're letting go of the thoughts because the world is not what you think. I remember one of my professors in grad school even had a sign on his door that meditation is not what you think, which I think is kind of clever. Well, the story then goes that the fifth ancestor recognized that this guy is pretty wise. And so clandestinely in the middle of the night, he calls him in their room, and they do a discourse on the Diamond Sutra. And then he gets the transmission, the bowl and the ropes. And so now get the hell out of here. Actually, he escorts him to the ferry. And there's some really nice Chinese and Japanese art that depicts this scene where the fifth ancestor is ferrying over the river. There's a metaphor right there, right? So nirvana samsara, ferrying across the river. Now, go back home in the south and hide out and don't tell anyone, because man, if these people know that what I just did, they'll kill you. Well, somebody did try. Several of them did try chasing after him, and so there was one particular monk who is an ex-military general. Now, this was common practice in ancient China, because if you are in the military and you're a commissioned officer and you're on the losing side of a battle, well, you don't have much of a future after that. If you're lucky, they'll just kill you on the spot, chop off your head. But there was an escape clause, that if you can get out of your uniform and put on the robes of a monk and go hide out in the monastery, they'll leave you alone. So you had a lot of ex-military people who were monks, not because they were interested in Buddhism, but they were interested in not having their head chopped off. But I suppose if you hang out in the monastery long enough, you might get a little bit interested in this subject. Now here's where we get a transition in the text. Because now this ex-general monk is after the sixth ancestor and eventually catches up with him. He's the only one that does. And the sixth ancestor just takes the bowl and the robes and said, hey, this is not worth fighting for. Here, they're yours. He said, no, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the Dharma. Now we get into a transition in the text. So the story is essentially over now, and now we start getting into the teachings. So here's how he responds. You already possess the prajna, wisdom. That's a little redundant, isn't it? Prajna means wisdom. Maybe I should talk to Red Pine about his translation here. So you already possess the prajna wisdom of enlightenment, but because your minds are deluded, you cannot understand by yourself. You need to find a truly good friend to show you the way to see your nature. This seems to be a timely subject because we've been doing some discussion about what constitutes a true teacher from our true teacher. But a true teacher, the true teaching is actually the Zazen, correct? It is the sitting meditation which is a true teacher. And so the person who is a true teacher is the teacher who says, sit. I remember a time at a retreat with Mizumi Roshi. It was kind of early morning, and we don't do that. We don't do it here, but the Mizumi would have interviews. So you every other day or so during a retreat, you'd go in for an interview. And I was heavily, I was taking a lot of anti-inflammatory, so I'm all drowsy, and my head is in a cloud, and so I go into the interview room in ritual form. You have to bow and all that. And then when I'm bowing, I see these two Chinese characters that I recognize, big and mountain, and so I just verbalize it, big mountain. And then as soon as and then all of a sudden I hear this thunder of a voice of Mizumi say, sit! And That's the true teaching. Sit. Is it nothing he says is as important as letting go of thought, the actual zazen itself. There seems to be some challenge to this idea also in the text, which I'll point out, of just what it is to sit. So here we get into the teachings proper. And he quotes from this text, and I'm not even sure how to pronounce this guy's name. Can you pronounce his name? Vermana Kirti. Okay, thank you. I've actually never read it all the way through. I've read bits and pieces of it. And so I actually just recently bought this copy because it's a really nice copy. It has the Chinese at the back, so it's bilingual and it's very nicely formatted. It even has this wonderful picture, a scene from the sutra. So the storyline, to make it briefly, is this guy was a contemporary of Siddhartha Gautama. Well, you know, Shariputra was a disciple of the historical Buddha. And so the story is, so this guy is a businessman. He's not a monk. He's a lay practitioner. He supports the Sangha, but he's not formally part of it. But Siddhartha says that he's a very good and wise person, and told Shariputra, who's been spending a lot of time alone in the jungle meditating, go talk to this person. You know, he's sick. He's ill. Go talk to him. Go attend to him. Because he's a very wise person. You can learn from him. Well, Shariputra is kind of like off. What are you talking? You want me to go hang out with a business person? Really? All caught up in that worldliness and things like that? You want me to do that? Are you serious? Really? Say, yes, go. And Manjushri, by the way, also goes. The story really gets bizarre at certain points, like the house is too small, and then he does some kind of a sorcery to expand it so he can bring in hundreds of bodhisattvas and things like that. These stories can be quite wonderful. And there was even a apparently how do you say his name again? Vamala Kirti. So Vamala Kirti apparently had a roommate. You know about his roommate? Yeah, I was a little surprised about this. In fact, I consulted a friend of mine who's into Tantric Buddhism, and he identifies this particular the Bodhisattva deity form, and I can't remember, but it's a little bit like Tara, but I don't recall where it actually names the goddess, but there's a goddess living with him, and so here Shariputra is being assaulted on two different fronts. One, he's having to hang out with a sick businessman. And two, the sick businessman has a woman living with him. A goddess, but a woman nevertheless. So Shariputra is kind of put in his place because there's combat dharma between him and the goddess in which he loses. In other words, the goddess, the woman, knows more about the dharma than he does. So it kind of puts him in his place. I find it interesting that after the Diamond Sutra, this is the next sutra that's mentioned in the Platform Sutra. Now why is that? Let's consider. Now eventually the sixth ancestor would take ordainment. We know that from the historical documents that he is considered one of the monks that was a disciple of the fifth ancestor. But he was the only southern monk. All the rest of them were in the north. And most of this text is basically talking about how the northern disciples got it all wrong. That they're not teaching the true Dharma. That the true Dharma actually belongs to the southern tradition. And there are other ways this is dichotomized. Besides north and south, there's like dull, which is the north, and sharp in the south. diluted in the north, or actually gradual. So the gradual approach, like the poem, I'm going to be dusting this mirror. Okay, that's for dull-minded people who just aren't very very smart and just can't quite understand. And so you have to kind of give them something to chew on until they get to where they're going. I mean, it's actually a little bit condescending. Like you're just too stupid to understand this. So here, use this mantra. Right. So keep in mind, we are of the tradition of the Southern sudden enlightenment, not the gradual. So the sudden enlightenment is you hear it like he heard the Diamond Sutra and immediately, bam, he got it, like that. But if you're slow-witted, then you have to work on it a little bit. Now it does say that maybe you eventually get there that way, but it's not as good as the sudden enlightenment. You did a Dharma talk about that not long ago, about the gradual, and that was a good Dharma talk. All right, so here he's quoting from this sutra. A straightforward mind is the place of enlightenment. A straightforward mind is the Pure Land. That's interesting. He brought up Pure Land. So we're going to talk about one practice samadhi. And so I want to read this entire section here. Deluded people who cling to external attitudes of the Dharma get hold of one practice samadhi and just say that sitting motionless, eliminating delusions, and not thinking thoughts are one practice samadhi. But if this were true, a dharma like that would be the same as lifeless, as you're just being dead, and would constitute an obstruction of the way instead. The way has to flow freely. Why block it up? The way flows freely when the mind does not dwell on any dharma. Now the word dharma can have different meanings in different contexts. So there's dharma, let's say with a big D, which is the teachings that we've inherited through the lineage, going back to Shakyamuni. But there's also the word dharma as used in Abhidharma for the nature of anything that is. So the Abhidharma was trying to get down to the constituent nature of the world itself. And so I think that they're flipping back and forth between the two meanings in this passage. But go on from there. Once it dwells on something, it becomes bound. If sitting motionless were right, Vamalakriti should not have criticized Shariputra for meditating in the forest. So there's the reference there. You might remember, what was it, Mosu, the guy that was sitting in meditation when his teacher came along and said, "What you doing?" "I'm meditating." "Ooh, good. "Why are you meditating?" "So I can be a Buddha." "Oh, Buddha. That's so nice. Picks up a rock. No, this is the rock. And here the guy's trying to meditate. "What the hell are you doing?" "I'm polishing this rock to make it a mirror." Hey, we got a reference to the mirror again. "I'm polishing this rock to make it into a mirror." Well, no amount of polishing a rock is going to turn that into a mirror. And no amount of meditation is going to make you a Buddha. So that's a famous koan. What does that mean? Well, what we would say here is you don't meditate to become a Buddha. Your meditation itself is Buddha, right? So that's sort of the teaching here. It's you don't meditate in order to become something, because if that's what you're doing, you're not meditating. Because whatever it is, it's not out there somewhere, it's in this very moment. I think there's another koan where where somebody is asked a question about the Dharma and the guy just pounds his staff down to the ground and says, just this, just this. You don't get to Buddhahood. I think it was Suzuki Roshi that said something like, there's no such thing as enlightened people, there's just enlightened actions. Oh, I'm over time already. Maybe that would be a good place to pause. There's no such thing as enlightened people, there's enlightened action. Well, I always over-prepare and I at least want to go to the one more thing from this. This is Red Pine's commentary, and in his commentary he quotes from this sutra, and I'm going to leave it with this. Meditation means conducting your life without leaving the stillness of samadhi. So adding some commentary to that. We do zazen in order to have that stillness of samadhi. But where does that go when we get off the cushion? The point here is take it with you. There's a great book by T.G. Suzuki on Zen and Japanese culture where he talks about things like the tea ceremony and the flower arrangements and archery and the various other things. And the thing interesting about that is each one of those things is an expression of Zen. So there is the Zen of sitting on your cushion, but then there's the Zen of drinking tea. There's a Zen of arranging flowers. Bringing that stillness into everything that you do so that samadhi does not leave you when you leave the cushion. So that's, I think, one of the central teachings of the Platform Sutra is it's about how to bring that stillness of samadhi into every aspect of your life without separation, so that a sick businessman hanging out with a goddess can be just as much of a Buddha as someone who's a monastic. Which is not to put down monasticism, because that is sort of the vehicle through which the transmission takes place. But I think the monasticism exists less for the sake of the individual and more for the sake of all sentient beings. So we chant that, and actually that chant is in the this Platform Sutra of saving all sentient beings. Questions, comments? Nobody has anything to say? It's low, lack of stability, impermanence. I'm freaking out. Huh?
That's what I was just going to have you talk about, stillness and impermanence.
Ah.
And you just mentioned it.
Oh, okay.
So,
Isn't telepathy wonderful?
yeah.
Anything else?
I guess you mentioned that you've had that copy of the Diamond Sutra since you were in high school, is that what you said?
Well, not this one.
No, I mean the Diamond Sutra, not the
Oh,
Platform.
yeah, this one, yeah. I think you said since high school, at least since a teenager.
So I'm curious to hear your story about your first encounter with that text and kind of what meaning you found in it at the time and maybe how that's changed, if it has.
Back then, well, first, I wasn't doing any kind of formal practice because it didn't exist in Indiana at that time. I was practicing martial arts. And as a high school kid, I wanted to be a Kane in Kung Fu. I'll give you a nickel now.
That's what everyone your age says.
No, the Shaolin Monastery, I wanted, well, maybe I did want to do that. Really my introduction to Buddhism came from the martial arts. And so in the martial arts, you have the Tantien, the hara, I think you say in Japanese. You put your energy there and you keep centered and still. So you have to have that still point, and then around that, all your actions evolve. So it's that kind of integration that's right there in the martial arts. And so that was my Zen until I got to San Francisco and started sitting at the San Francisco Zen Center. in addition to just reading a lot of Suzuki. So I read like just about everything that Suzuki had in English. That multi-volume set of essays on Buddhism, I mean, I still go back to that. I'm very much inspired by D.T. Suzuki. You know, he's sort of Alan Watts wrote this really cool essay about D.T. Suzuki and called him the mindless scholar. And I want to be a mindless scholar. That sounds like fun. So it was sort of through the lens of D.T. Suzuki that I found that particular text, because you know he actually Suzuki also has a translation of Platform Sutra, which I read a long time ago. So my life as a teenager, you know, was just becoming passionately interested in a lot of philosophical issues, and Buddhism was just one of them. And I think at that time I was attending a Unitarian church. Because in Unitarians, you know, when we pray in the Unitarian way, it's, oh God, if there is a God, save my soul if I have one. So they didn't have any crazy theology or something like that. It just seemed much more practical. I don't know, does that answer your question?
I'm also curious to hear, do you think if you had not seen Kung Fu, the TV show, that you would be here today?
No, I think I would be,
Yeah.
because I was already introduced to the martial arts when I
Okay.
lived in Hawaii. I took judo and so forth. So I think I probably would have been here. I mean, the key thing was when I lived in San Francisco and went to the San Francisco Zen Center. That was sort of the beginning of my formal, and about 2 or 3 years later, I took precepts with Mizumi Roshi in Los Angeles.
I'm
And so,
just thinking we need something like the show Kung Fu now for the current generation.
okay, well, maybe the metrics would work.
Yeah.
Because you know the guy that starred as the lead character, I can't remember his name, but he also played Buddha.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh yeah, in the movie The Little Buddha.
Keanu Reeves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he already played the Buddha, and here he is in the metrics. It's all about awakening, right? Which pill are you going to eat? So why don't you write the script then, and we'll see if we can get a production going.
Sounds good. I'll
There's
get
also
that.
Ted from Bill and Ted, which doesn't necessarily make me think of something that makes me really
Okay, well, we just blew that one.
And also John Wick.
Oh, we got someone? Hello, I can't see you because I'm nearsighted.
It's actually me.
Oh, you? Okay. I thought you were going to call up somebody there.
No, I'm here.
Oh, I can see you.
You can see me. So you sort of outlined how the sixth ancestor, Huineng, he maybe part of his legacy is that, so he was not literate. He didn't know how to read. He was chopping firewood and pounding rice, and just through hearing the Diamond Sutra, it was supposed to have sort of awakened him, you know.
Yeah,
like
that's sort of the motif of the sudden enlightenment. He heard the sutra and bam, he immediately understood.
And that also sort of part of the legacy of that sutra is kind of expanding perhaps the insight of Zazen into all of your activities. And so I'm wondering, from your perspective as a scholar and as someone who really does sort of dive into the texts, sort of how you see having an intellectual understanding of the teachings, how does that sort of worm its way into your practice of Zazen, which is beyond words, which is sort of you can't capture it with words, and yet we use a lot of words to talk about it. So how do you see that interaction happening?
Okay, so if you can have zazen in flower arrangements, archery, tea serving, and things like that, why not also for reading books? I mean, so Nagarjuna makes the point of, the relationship between relative and absolute. And so there are no words that can express the absolute in its totality. It's just impossible. So anything that you think you know, you don't really know as an absolute truth, because it's just not possible. However, you still have to live in the world. So you still have to interact, and that includes the use of intellect, the use of thinking, and so forth. Now, for Nagarjuna, that would be instrumental. So you could be a pragmatist in that sense. That is, I have certain ideas that govern certain modes of behavior, which themselves are not ultimately true, but have a utility in my day-to-day operation. So I simply don't hold on to them. I pick up a hammer to use for a particular task, and when I'm done, I put it down. It would be very awkward to have a hammer permanently fastened to your hand. I think there was some kind of a punk rock movie with this scissor fingers or something like that. Oh, you know that movie?
Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah, I mean, that would be very awkward, right? But they're useful tools, but not if they're permanently attached to you. It's useful to put them down from time to time, right? And do something different. Right? And so that's how I kind of look at the intellectual life. The intellectual life has a utility, but it doesn't yield any ultimate truth. The ultimate truth is when you put it down, drop it, and just open the hand of thought. Does that work?
Yeah, and so I'm also curious how, I mean, for example, we can have a sitting practice and sort of think that we're opening the hand of thought, or think that we are following the teaching as we're sitting, when really we have some idea operating.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, I could be like in a deep samadhi, and then I think to myself, ooh, deep samadhi. Well, that blew that.
Right, and so do you see sort of reading sutras, taking in teachings through words, is it influencing sort of how we approach the cushion? Even though what we're doing there is beyond those words, somehow it helps us know how to do that.
Is that how it is for you?
I mean, that's kind of how, because I mean, looking at my own sort of interaction with meditation or zazen through the years, I think I had all sorts of different. To me, it feels like as the longer I've hung around here and heard many people like you sharing words about what zazen is, it's sort of refined the actual practice such that, but I still don't get how that happens, and maybe I don't need to know how that happens. How do the words somehow get their way into this wordless practice?
I'm sorry, I'm visualizing Yoda now. So it's like, no, there is no why.
Well, it sounds like it kind of goes back to, you made that reference earlier, like that before you practice mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers, and then when you're practicing, I can't remember, there's some
Mountains are no longer mountains.
Mountains are no longer mountains, and then after you've reached a point of awakening, then mountains are truly mountains, and rivers are truly rivers. I think one of the hard things about practicing, especially when in Zen, there's a lot of Zen literature, and we read a lot of it, and a lot of these involve esoteric ideas. There's a lot of highly educated people who are in this room, and part of what we're just talking about is how the mind can actually impose some sort of form on what it is that you're experiencing. And so many times they can come down to sit, like sometimes we take a lot of these intellectual concepts and now it's like, oh, this is what's happening right now. And so I think there's oftentimes a lot of ways in which like Zazen can be our own just little container where we exercise our own delusions until we kind of get to the point where we're actually kind of recognizing, you know, a little bit what is delusion and what is not, though we have to use a really diluted brain to try to understand what delusion is. And so like that word's where we're always going to kind of fall short of characterizing that experience. I don't know, is that maybe?
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, and I mean, when Okamura Roshi says all the time that when we're sitting, letting go of thoughts, we're also letting go of thoughts of the Dharma.
Yeah.
We're letting go of
Yeah,
thoughts
those are
of
thoughts too.
everything that, all the teachings that are somehow guiding what we're doing, but we're not thinking about them then, at that point. So it's just it's an interesting kind of
Well, you know
thing
that
going on.
you know the koan, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. I mean, obviously, we're not advocating that you violate your precepts, right? But rest assured, you're probably not going to meet the Buddha on the road, so you don't have to worry about violating your precepts. But it's the idea of the Buddha, right? That you know, somebody says, "So, are you enlightened?" I sometimes get that question: "Are you enlightened?" And well, of course I am. No, I don't say that. I say, well, wait a minute. So, if I attempt to answer your question, then then you already have a certain idea about what enlightenment is, and whatever that idea you have of what enlightenment is not enlightenment. So there's no way I can answer your question yes or no. Other than, you know, it's not really. I might go back to Suzuki when he says there's no such thing as an enlightened person, there's just enlightened action. So I can have an enlightened action. I can be loving and compassionate and caring and penetrate into the ontology of being by no thought, you know, whatever all that means. But as soon as I verbalize all that, there's intellectual clutter that comes along, and I might actually, like idol worship, I might actually take the form as if it is what it's supposed of something that it isn't. So we go back to the Heart Sutra: form is emptiness, emptiness is form. So you know, so get rid of the idea of enlightenment too, because even the idea of enlightenment is just an idea. And when there's no one around to be enlightened, then you're enlightened. Okay, I think I'm just doing gymnastics with my mind now. But you know, I empathize with how you express yourself, because you know, even after, oh God, how many years, at least 30 plus years of doing Zazen, you know, the same issues come up every time. Doesn't matter how often. I think we have a saying around here that the junior most practitioner of Zazen is exactly the same as the senior most practitioner of Zazen. Every time you sit down to do Zazen, it's exactly the same as if you did it for the first time. All the same stuff just keeps coming up. You might even think, well, what's the point then? But that's an idea also, let go of that one.